Good morning, everybody. We're pleased to welcome you today here in Moscow. We're starting our 2026 Open Dialogue event. The Open Dialogue has indeed become a multinational event that brings together experts from every country in the world to discuss the future of our planet, the future of the world we live in, the future of economy and the social sphere. Of course, our main event in April 2026 is the Open Dialogue as such. As we're gearing up for it, we have already received over 1,500 essays from 100 countries. Indeed, people from all over the world are willing to put forward their ideas to make life in our world better. Today we have our January expert dialogues. You have already seen our colleagues' presentations. Today we're going to hear many interesting stories of how our world is changing. Together with our colleagues, we will discuss global trends. Why does it matter? Because understanding where the world is heading, where this economy and social sphere are heading, matters. It matters because we should be prepared for these changes. These changes should not catch us unawares. Instead, we should use them for the benefit of our countries and, crucially, for the benefit of people. So, let me dwell today on 5 global megatrends, and I will say right away that artificial intelligence will not be featured here as a separate megatrend. This is a topic with lots of hype surrounding it. But we need to understand that artificial intelligence has arrived already. It's changing every area in our life. And every single one of these 5 megatrends bears a major imprint of artificial intelligence. I'd like to preface my talk by saying that I won't just be discussing these trends speaking academically. I will describe them using case studies of individual people. We've selected 3 persons. Our first person is a farmer from an African country. The second person represents Asia and his manager in a logistics company. And the third story is about a lady from Eastern Europe. These 3 people will help me show you how our world is changing and what effect these changes have on ordinary people. I'd like to start with a story of changes affecting globalization, of changes in the development of our world, the interconnections between the largest economies. The globalization trend of recent decades is something that many people have spoken about, and it is indeed something that has had a positive effect on the entire planet. Yes, if we look at such large economies as China and India, their active involvement in the global economy allowed them to significantly improve their quality of life and significantly reduce poverty. And globalization certainly provided the entire world with affordable goods and services, so it did bring many good things. Yet the globalization model we observed in the last decades has indeed arrived at its end. And I would like to start talking about this trend by making it clear how global economy has been changing. On the left here, you see the world's largest economies by purchasing power parity. And I will show you the changes that has taken place since 1980. You can see one group of states, G7, gradually losing its standing in the ranking while BRICS countries are climbing up the ranks. By 2025, the share of G7 states had plunged below 30%. It stands at 28%, while the share of BRICS countries stands at virtually 40%. This is a radical change in the landscape. But we certainly aren't talking about the GDP alone. We're also talking about many other indicators, for instance, global trade indicators. This is indeed a radical systemic change. We can see that in the 90s, largest trade flows were mostly confined to the countries of the global north. But today, countries of the global south are playing an increasingly more significant role, and the cross flows of goods and services therein are on rise. which is extremely important, and generally, countries of the Global South are becoming more economically connected. BRICS countries are now engaging in trading with each other directly without recourse to any third countries. These are very important changes, and they are, in fact, even more profound. We found one ranking that reflects this. There is an international database called Dimensions. It reflects a number of research publications across the globe, and here we can see that, when it comes to their role in technological development, BRICS countries begin to make major advances in global rankings. China is now ranked first, India is ranking third, Russia is in the top 10. BRICS countries now play an increasingly important role as they lay down the technological foundation, bolster their technological sovereignty, and create a technological framework for further increasing their interactions. And certainly, if we're looking into the future, population numbers constitute a very important indicator. Here's a graph that demonstrates how this indicator has been changing since 1980. This is a graph that shows birth in various economies. BRICS countries have been dominating here for all the past decades. We see ratios here. BRICS countries accounted for 50% of birth in the 90s, which define the changes to the global economic makeup that we are witnessing today. This is a factor that predicts ahead of time upcoming global economic changes. These indicators are quite volatile. We will speak about demographics more today. You can see the changes in the number of births in China here. This is a very important indicator. In 2010, the figure was 17 million people. In 2025, births in China dropped to 7.9 million people. But the key thing I would like you to take away from this slide is that the share of births in the G7 countries dropped to 10%. This is the level where the global share of economies of these countries will gravitate to in the coming decades. If we zoom in on economic growth centers in more detail, I'd like to show you this graph. What is it about? It's about the development of countries and their trajectories. It means this is a rather complicated graph, but I will try to explain. So the bottom horizontal scale is the economic development level. That is, all the countries to the right have higher GDP by per capita, purchasing power parity. The vertical scale is the urbanization rate. That is, the higher a country is on this scale, the larger is the urban populate share, and the limit is 100%. The size of a given circle reflects a given country's birth rate. Let's take a look at the dynamics of this slide, the dynamic of this graph. For several decades, countries have mostly been moving along this dashed line. They go through a growth spurt, and you can see that China, for instance, is already closer, like Russia, to the upper right-hand corner in the graph, which means that the largest chunk of the growth spurt, with its growing urbanization and growing economic development level, is already behind them. For the first quarter of the 21st century, China was the global economic leader and drove the global economic growth. And today, new countries are coming to the fore. The countries that will be making the largest contribution to the economic growth. Such countries as Indonesia and India. And I would like to draw your attention to the emergence of large African countries, for instance, Nigeria. In the coming years, Nigeria's birth rate is estimated to exceed China's birth rate. And it will be a defining moment, which we will discuss a bit later today. The changing population makeup in various regions. There's an event that seems to have taken place a long time ago, but it happened only 5 years ago. When the Ever Given blocked the Suez Canal, that event was taken in making the top uncertainty level in global economy and in global trade. Of course, it cannot compare to what we see today. And as we look back, we can only smile thinking that a tanker worried us so. If we look at the global uncertainty today, we can see that it has been hitting record levels. We keep hearing about sanctions, about tariffs, about geopolitical tensions, and about lots of other things. And the events transpiring today around the world, in fact, stem from the major change to the global makeup. Some leading countries are losing their standing both where the size of their economies is concerned, and crucially, where the role they play in the global development is concerned. Before, it used to be a purely unipolar world, with the United States as the world hegemon and determined every country's trajectory and its way forward. But today, we have a different picture entirely. And we're going to talk about that too. What's important here is an attempt to preserve. Once global leadership, in fact, produced the opposite result. The trends in the way the world changes, in the way the global economy changes, are straightforward and inevitable. Nothing can be done about them. For instance, an attempt to influence Russia via financial sanctions produced the following results. Here we can see a graph that represents the share of currencies the Russian Federation uses in its international payments. The color green is the ruble. The light color is mostly BRICS currencies. And the color orange is currencies of G7 countries. When G7 countries were imposing their sanctions, they were seeking to make it possible for Russia to engage in foreign trade. They intended to hurt Russia's economy. But the only thing they achieved was spurring a major spike in payment made with national currencies. In 2025, 85% of Russia's transactions are concluded without recourse to the currencies of G7 countries. The only result G7 countries achieved is that their currencies lost their standing, and these countries have gravely hurt their standing and their role in the global economy. Let's go on. Another crucial factor we have to keep in mind is emergent non-country actors in a global landscape. For instance, social networks with their ecosystems that can host billions of people. For instance, social networks such as Facebook, with 3 billion users monthly, which is far greater than the population of the world's largest countries. Clearly, these associations, these communications, these services on these platforms are a new factor that has a major effect on the global development and the geopolitical situation. And of course, we should remember the emergent decentralized solutions. Speaking about social media, there is also a company that manages them and sets the rules. Yet new social media emerge that have their own rules, but have no management. For example, these are cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, which exist in accordance with some rules, but there is no leader, nobody in command of them. And we can see how over the last 10 years the capitalization of the cryptocurrency market has grown significantly, which shows and tells us that a new class of players is now coming to the global stage. Well, as I said before, the globalization process we have seen in recent decades has actually come to an end. Yet it does not mean that globalization does not continue. It continues on the basis of different principles, and other countries are starting to lead in this process. We are truly moving away from a unipolar world. And in today's world, as we can see, one of the key words that we hear today is sovereignty. Only countries that possess sovereignty in the new world will be able to compete and lead the way in this multipolar development. Let me say something about sovereignty. In our classifications, this sovereignty has 3 levels. The highest level is the state level, which is the territorial integrity of country, its independence from powers of the state. It is the answer to the question, or will the country exist or not? The second level of sovereignty is the public sovereignty, meaning what the country will be like. Here, We're talking about the culture, values, history, language, and religion of the country. And the third level is socio-economic. It is about how the country will exist. Here we're talking about the technologies that we use, the production assets that we have, and the staff training systems. This is everything that largely defines all the things we use in our lives, the things we see around us every day. So the main point here is that any country needs all three levels of sovereignty if it wants to be a truly sovereign country and to pursue its own independent policy. You cannot lose one of these sovereignty levels and yet remain sovereign in general. The state, public, and socio-economic sovereignties combined are the three apexes in a triangle that support the country's overall sovereignty. Now, to sum up everything that I said in this first part, the whole world is essentially shifting from the being unipolar and it's becoming something different. And we try to describe it in broad strokes, speaking about the countries that are approaching sovereignty, and there are no fully sovereign countries in the world. Of course, the world's four largest economies in terms of purchasing power parity are in lead. These countries are China, United States, India, and Russia, which predominantly cater for their own sovereignty. It is very important, however, that new critical players are starting to emerge on the global map. Yes, there are major centers of economic growth. We have already mentioned Southeast Asia, for example, Indonesia. It is one of the world's largest economies, a booming country that is trying to shape its own sovereignty, and it's already playing an important role in terms of economic influence. We're now starting to see connected countries that play a key role. For example, one of such countries is the United Arab Emirates, which is one of smaller countries that find it difficult to ensure their complete sovereignty. Yet their role is to enable communication among large centers of sovereignty, among other economies, and standing at the junction of these paths. I believe Parag Khanna will also talk about this in detail in this presentation today. They play a key role in the global development. It is also very important that we are seeing non-governmental networks emerge, which I spoke about before. The decentralized solutions and social media, which are becoming de facto independent actors on the global map. Let me repeat once again, this is the world that we already live in, and the world where we're destined to live. In fact, many countries are now facing the choice of either becoming an arbiter of one of the major centers of sovereignty. For example, if I take a look at the top right-hand corner, here is the European Union, which has largely lost its sovereignty in all key areas over the past decades and has de facto entered the orbit of the United States of America, or trying to build their own independent policy by defining their role on the map. The world will be changing, and we will certainly see this in our lives and in the life of our protagonists. Here I would like to tell you how the life of our African farmer will change. Africa is truly the most promising region in terms of economics and social development, especially in the second half of the 21st century. So this farmer's life will change for the better, because there are more logistical connections with major centers of economic growth, and he will supply more products to countries like China, Russia, and South Asia. Investments coming from new regions will strengthen interdependencies. This is how the economic changes of the African continent, the interdependencies with the BRICS nations that leads in the global economy, will drive the qualitative progression and qualitative improvement in the life of our men from Africa. Let's move on. The second trend I want to talk about is platformization of the global economy. This is actually a very important process. It is our common perception that a platform is some sort of phone application or some kind of website where you can register. Yet, in fact, this is a global transformation in the economic activity. In the past centuries, the global economy has been developing through gradual automation, the automation of relationships, for example, between humans and nature. We all know how industry has changed it, how more and more new tools appeared to boost labor efficiency and improve our production processes. This relationship between humans and nature requires less and less human involvement with every next step, and the production output per capita is growing rapidly. This has been one of the key drivers for the entire global economy, and this automation, among other things, has continued throughout the last several centuries. What changed in the second half and in late 20th century was the emergence of digitalization, which enables us to automate our management processes. Yet, this was basically a stepping stone, because now we, and all of the global economy, are moving to the third major stage, which is automation of not just individual processes, but automation of institution. You know, we all use different services, platform-based taxi services, for example. So what makes this process so special? The thing is that a simple market in an application, be it Uber in the West, or the Yangoal or Yandex services, as we call them in Russia, presumes full automation of market relations. The actors in this process, taxi drivers, and people who want to get from point A to point B, have actually lost their right to determine the price and negotiate with each other. We lost the right to choose the counterparty. It is all automated, and the platform has taken over all these functions. A lot of intermediaries have been ousted from the system, and we are now seeing complete automation of this market institution. As a matter of fact, platforms have brought a fundamental change into our understanding of economic relations. Indeed, they have substantially reduced the cost and enforced finding the right place, the cost of finding a verifying counterparty, and the cost of market entry for individual actor in the process. And of course, they have significantly reduced the number of intermediaries. In essence, as I have said before, market institutions are being completely automated, and in fact, an entirely state-planned economy is being shaped within separate industries. As we all know, there is no such thing as pure market, and any businesses is a shift away from market relations, since it has rigid internal contracts and a strict hierarchy. Yet, in recent times, firms have traditionally had their limits. They have been unable to completely replace the market because of the main issues that they face in their operations. As Ronald Coase said in his famous theory of firm, every firm has its own limit. As a firm gets bigger, its internal costs rise very quickly. And as business grows in scale, its costs begin to rise, thereby making this complete replacement of the market by one specific firm ineffective. Now, what we see in the case of digital platforms is a dramatic change in the whole narrative, because marginal costs of a digital platform actually continue to go down. And the larger the scale of a platform, the bigger the market share it captures, and the greater the economic impact it produces. There is a certain positive cycle that is typical for digital platforms. The bigger our ecosystem grows, the more participants we get, the more data we have in the platform, and more data result in a higher precision of our algorithms, better operational efficiency, better product, lower prices, better user experience, and this helps our ecosystem grow even bigger. As a result of this positive cycle, platforms that replace the entire market achieve maximum efficiency. Going back to the taxi example, if a large metropolis uses just one platform that encompasses all consumers and all service providers, this allows for maximum efficiency of the platform. Let's talk about the next aspect. This is yet another critical feature of digital platforms. This is where we put artificial intelligence in the picture. Digital platforms are a tool that is best suited to the application of artificial intelligence. Complete digitalization of all data, big data. With all of this, AI can be used to improve product quality, fine-tune the algorithms, and make the platform a lot more efficient than simple market relations. It is crucial to understand that platforms are not just niche phenomenon. They will impact every sector of the economy and social sphere: education, healthcare, finance, trade, and tourism. Everything will be platformized, step by step, and the countries that undergo this process faster will achieve higher levels of economic development and efficiency.
Высокого уровня экономического развития и экономической эффективности. Понятно, что
Clearly,
платформизация —
platformization is not solely a positive force driving the economy forward.
то, что будет двигать экономику вперед, но на самом деле
It actually brings a whole set of problems.
проблем. Есть у отдельных
Some researchers use the term technological feudalism. Indeed, due to the monopolization of certain markets, the power of platform owners has increased dramatically, resembling the role of feudal lords in the Middle Ages.
на роль феодалов, которые мы видели в средние века. И
This creates a potential driver for rising inequality and income concentrations, exacerbating negative trends already present in many countries.
во многих странах негативные тренды. Также, если мы
Linking this to the early topic of globalization, we encounter a concept I'd like to highlight:
видим и тот термин, который бы я хотел бы сейчас
platform colonization. If a country lacks sovereignty, if it does not possess its own platform solutions, it is doomed to be merely a user of foreign platforms. What does this imply? It implies heavy dependence. You are forced to pay commissions fees that flow out of your country. In the event of geopolitical disagreement, these platforms can be switched off at any moment, causing serious domestic issues. Furthermore, the platform's development depends entirely on a third party. Your ability to influence the process is strictly limited. Essentially, centers of sovereignty can use this technological channel to exert significant influence on other nations, amounting to platform colonization. Therefore, it is vital to understand what level of platform sovereignty you possess in the new economy. It is zero sovereignty, where you depend entirely on foreign solutions. Basic sovereignty is when you establish, at the very least, an independent control circuit. The platform may originate abroad, but you migrate it within your borders to prevent a shutdown. It continues to function in any situation, even if a third part wants to disconnect it. However, at this level, you cannot develop or advance the technology yourself. Then there is advanced sovereignty, creating your own solutions and platforms that you control and develop. The standing of major centers of the global economic map will be largely determined by the level of platform sovereignty they possess in this new economy. I'd like to conclude this section by returning to our character from Eastern Europe. Taking Russia as an example, we see the active development of domestic platform solutions that improve quality of life. This includes a vast array of modern urban services, from taxis to delivery and much more, that simplify daily routines. While on maternity leave, she can easily find temporary work through gig economy platforms. Her children use modern educational platforms to develop their talents and realize their potential more effectively. Then there are healthcare platforms utilizing artificial intelligence. For those unfamiliar, I highly recommend studying the experience of AI implementation in Moscow's healthcare system. I believe it's currently the most advanced solution in the world, allowing for health monitoring and timely interventions to ensure she and her children stay healthy. Let's move on. The third topic I want to touch upon is the financial sphere. In my opinion, very substantial changes lie ahead in the coming decades. Why do I think so? There are several factors. First is the state of public finances. The graph you see here shows the public debt and budget deficits of the G7 countries. You can see the accumulation of debt. At the turn of the century, it was around 80% of GDP. Now, it is nearing 130%. Crucially, the baseline trend is deterioration of budget balances. This stems from various causes, including objective tendencies like demographic shifts, which we will discuss today. Demographic trends are driving up budget expenditures, while the tax base is under pressure, worsening the fiscal situation. It is important to understand that the traditional financial system, based on creating new money and debt within the commercial banking sector, has reached a certain limit of their financing, as shown in this graph. If we look beyond the public sector, the situation is even grimmer. The limits of debt accumulation are visible, meaning the creation of debt-based money as a global economic driver is slowly coming to an end. We constantly talk about debt, but the flip side of debt is always assets. As debt accumulates, so do assets. But they accumulate primarily among the wealthiest segment of population. Take the United States. The share of wealth held by the richest 1% has risen from just 22% of GDP in the 90s to over 30% today. The system is becoming unbalanced and rising inequality, amplified by social media, leads to social polarization and destabilization. This is another reason why finance in its traditional form is nearing its end. Furthermore, while the financial sector contributes positively by allocating capital and financing development, it is actually very costly. Look at this graph showing the cost of the United States financial sector to the global economy. The entire world currently pays more than 2% of global GDP, giving 2% of income to the American financial system for the payment and investment functions it performs. In its current form, it is an extremely expensive institution. As a former employee of global banks, I know there is significant inefficiency. The incomes earned by financiers do not correspond to their actual contribution to the global economy. This burden is excessive and will obviously drive change. Additionally, as we discussed, the excessive sanctions, tariffs, and other barriers mean the traditional model, like payment via key Western banks, essentially no longer works. By attempting to weaponize the financial system, the West is actually destroying it very quickly. New connections are emerging, both in traditional formats and through decentralized systems and cryptocurrencies, shifting function, like the payment function, away from the traditional banking system. These are the reasons the financial sector is bound to change. The second major factor is the arrival of three technologies. First, there is blockchain, which allows for automated, verified transactions without human intervention. Second, there is artificial intelligence. And third, there are platform solutions. Their technologies are already mature and will fundamentally alter how the financial system operates. Here is a slightly academic slide on the economic functions performed by different segments throughout the 20th and early 21st centuries. It is important to note that commercial banks handle payment services, created new money, and allocated capital. Meanwhile, the budget focused on redistribution, and the central bank ensured overall stability. As I mentioned, creating new money via commercial banks relies on new debt, and the trend has reached its limit. In the coming decades, these three functions will migrate from commercial banks to either the state or decentralized finance system. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, may nationalize the emission process. Currently, commercial banks handle emission, but CBDCs could return these to the state level, helping finance budget deficits and growing social expenditures. Payment services will largely shift to decentralized solutions that remain operational regardless of the actions of third-party nations. Returning to our character, the farmer from Africa, and the emergence of new financial solutions. We know Africa lacks a developed financial system, but against that backdrop, new solutions are appearing and being adopted much faster. For the farmer, transactions and investments flows will become much more accessible, allowing, as I've said, the African continent to grow more rapidly. Let's move on. The fourth trend is demographic catastrophe. This isn't discussed enough in the modern world, but I personally believe it is a key issue for our planet because the fact that human civilization has entered in a period of severe depopulation. Yes, the population is still growing up year by year, but the peak is very close, and the changes demographics will bring are critical. The decline in total fertility rate has been ongoing for a long time, but we have now reached the point where it has fallen below the replacement level. We have dropped below this statistical waterline, meaning humanity is entering a zone where our expansion on the planet ceases and gradual contractions begins. There are various estimates regarding when the world will reach peak population, such as those by the United Nations. It is crucial to understand that these estimates are in a constant state of flux, and they are always being revised downwards. We have examined various studies indicating that even the UN forecast, which has already been scaled back, is not always based on reliable data. In reality, global birth rates are lower than the figures used in the United Nations projections. The UN forecast relies on unrealistic assumptions of a rapid recovery in fertility rates in individual countries or the stabilization of the total fertility rate, whereas the reality is different. I mentioned China earlier. We will talk a lot about China in this section. Just 10 years ago, China had 17-18 million births per year. Last year, it drops below 8 million, a twofold decrease. This downward trend is observable in almost every region of the world. Therefore, if we correct for these indicators and use realistic assumptions, the peak of the global population is not that far off. According to our estimates, it will happen around 2046, possibly even earlier. Previous forecasts, such as one from 2015, predicted around 11 billion people. A medium forecast from a couple of years ago suggested a peak of just over 10 billion in 2085. A low UN forecast, also from a few years back, placed the peak in 2055. However, all signs point to a much sharper decline. In the best-case scenario, the global population will peak at 9 billion. We are currently at about 8.2 billion. So, in terms of numbers, we are already close to the peak. Let's continue. What problems will this cause? A serious increase in the demographic burden. It's not just about total numbers, but a structural shift toward an older population. We will see this on the next graph for specific regions. The demographic burden will rise, because while this slide might make the trend look smooth. So, if we look at individual countries around the world, the situation there will change much faster, of course. Let's look at the traditional population pyramid. This is 1950. Here's what I want to draw your attention to right away. The first thing is when you look at the dynamics of this indicator from now until the end of the 21st century, I suggest you pay attention to the following. First of all, in this pyramid, the red part is Africa. You can see what a small share of the world's population it made up just 70 years ago. The yellow part is Asia, and the blue part is the rest of the world. On the right, you can see the global population structure includes the number of elderly, working-age people, and children. And here, there are key indicators of the ratio of elderly people, 65+, versus working-age people. In 1950, the burden on the working-age population was very low in this regard. The global figure is around 8%. It's 7% in Asia and 6% in Africa. Let's look at how the changes that have already occurred took place and how they will unfold in the future. You can see how Africa's share is changing considerably, and how the entire gender and age structure of the population is changing significantly. The working-age population, after peaking at almost 6 billion residents, could decline to 4 billion by the end of the century. And most importantly, how will the number of elderly people increase, and how will the ratio of elderly to working-age people change? Even in Africa, it will already be 30%, and worldwide, it will be 56%. A very significant change is being seen in Asia, where the ratio of elderly to working-age people will be almost equal. Speaking of such nations, China, for example, is actually a very prominent country in terms of these changes. I mentioned what has already happened with the birth rate. In fact, this means that China's population has already passed its peak. Last year, China lost more than 3 million residents. It is experiencing a natural population decline. And there has been a huge increase in the age burden due to the sharp decrease in the number of children and a more robust older generation. Just 20-30 years ago, the birth rate was over 20 million per year. Now it is 8 million. This ratio will lead to a dramatic increase in the demographic burden. And that's not the only outcome. For example, here's a map of China and how the population was spread out in 1980. China has grown and changing rapidly in the 1920s. By the end of the year, we'll see a major population decline and significant change in the situation. And we need to understand what is happening in China, because it will impact the global economy as a whole and impact every country in the world. If China's population is currently 1.4 billion, then under this negative scenario, the population could drop to 500 million by the end of the century. That would be almost 3 times smaller than what we see today. What does it mean? Well, for example, today, China has approximately 900 million urban residents. Chinese cities have been actively developing and growing in recent decades. We have witnessed a powerful urbanization process that has largely dictated changes in the global economy. China had massive demand for resources to fuel this urbanization and development, and new industries were created in cities that supplied the entire world with goods. However, if the population drops to 500 million, there will be no more than 400 or 450 urban residents. This means that Chinese cities will be half empty by the end of the 21st century. And in fact, we're already seeing this. In some regions of China, for example, northeast China, the population there has dropped from 40 million to 30 million over the past 10 years. A very serious depopulation is already underway in certain regions of China, and it will only intensify. The question is, what will happen with the population distribution? The most likely scenario is, of course, that the population will be concentrated in certain large megacities, and we will actually see the emergence of ghost towns, from which the population will gradually leave, and, as a result, the infrastructure there will begin to deteriorate. A change of this kind would significantly alter the demand for both raw materials and China's production capacity. This is the trend that will have a global impact on all of human civilization in the 21st century. This is what will happen with the demographic burden in China. It's essentially the pyramid we saw in 1980, which largely predetermined the active development that we saw in China in 2090s and in 2000s, with a large working-age population and a small elderly population. This became the foundation for the very dynamic economic growth in the future. But by the end of the century, the situation will change dramatically. The working-age population will decrease by almost 75%, while the elderly population will increase by 500%, and this pyramid will be inverted and become highly unstable. The demographic shifts I'm referring to represent a major challenge for pension system worldwide, regardless of whether they are pay-as-you-go or funded. Every pension system relies on the same basic principle. Today's workers support those who have already retired. When the balance between these groups changes, the output generated by the working-age population may no longer be sufficient to sustain the expected standard of living for future retirees. Pension systems. This imbalance translates into a decline in the real value of assimilated assets, meaning that people's saving may be worth far less than anticipated. Take China as an example. The country has vast real estate market and high housing prices, but the sharp drop in the urban and overall population will inevitably reduce the actual value of this property. In cities that become depopulated, apartments could lose nearly all their worth. Consequently, a wide range of assets may depreciate sharply as demographic changes unfold, posing a serious challenge to pension systems, especially in countries with low birth rates. In comparison, demographic and social changes in the European Union tend to be more gradual and less severe than those projected for China. Even so, available projections show that government spending on pensions, healthcare, and long-term care will rise substantially, while education budget will contract due to the decline in the number of children. But in general, the surge in demand for public funding and social services will define the fiscal landscape. This brings us back to the financial dimension. Budgetary pressures, rising deficits, and the need of additional funding. All these dynamics are closely interlinked and will inevitably influence one another. Ultimately, demographic trends will expert a profound impact on the financial sector through this interconnected channel. Let's move on to the question of what can be done. First and foremost, policies aimed at boosting birth rates must become a global priority. Supporting families and children should be at the center of every national agenda, because without these efforts, as I mentioned earlier, the planet will inevitably face gradual depopulation. Second, active aging is unavoidable. Both personal aspirations and economic needs will drive older adults to remain active longer, making this a defining feature of modern societies. While we often focus on the negative sides of demographic change, it is equally important to recognize that the generation retiring in the 21st century will be the healthiest and best educated in human history. As a result, their contribution to the economy, and indeed the contributions of all of us who approach that stage of life, will be far greater than those previous generations. The third key factor is the rise of automation, robotics, autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, and digital platforms. These technologies will be crucial for driving productivity growth, since without them, it will be impossible to sustain sufficient levels of economic activity and output. And finally, the last trend. Here, let's us return to our character from Asia, whose circumstances are perhaps the most challenging of all. In countries like Japan, China, and others across East Asia, persistently low birth rates and rising demographic pressures are creating severe imbalances. For him, this will mean a much longer working life than expected today. Over time, he will likely experience economic stagnation on his surroundings, and his ability to maintain a decent standard of living will depend largely on his own active longevity and on how successfully his country adopts new technologies. To wrap up today's presentation, the fifth trend concerns the development of human capital in the new technological era. What does this mean in practice? We are witnessing four major technological transformations taking shape across the world, each of them profoundly reshaping the future of labor markets and education. The first transformation is the rise of autonomous systems. Automation, driverless vehicles, self-operating transport, and autonomous technologies across all sectors is set to revolutionize the structure of employment. The second transformation involves digital platforms, which we already discussed. Platform-based work represents a new model of employment. It is not traditional full-time work, but rather ongoing, project-oriented engagement, where workers participate in multiple projects across various platforms. The third transformation is, of course, artificial intelligence. AI will transform economic activity in an entirely new way. Unlike automation, which, as I mentioned, emerged long ago in human history and merely replaced one type of job with another, artificial intelligence will fundamentally reshape the structure of occupations. Entry-level and routine positions will sharply decline, while the demand for mid-level professionals will expand significantly. In other words, the traditional career pyramid, where a broad base of junior specialists gradually advance to mid and senior level roles, will be disrupted, as the base will narrow considerably. This will be the fundamental impact of AI. In addition, biotechnology, especially in the context of aging societies, will play an increasingly important role. Turning to the social sphere, the first area to highlight is education. This sector is facing profound change. Artificial intelligence, especially large generative models that have rapidly entered everyday life, is already transforming how we teach and how children learn. In fact, many children today use common AI applications to complete their homework. As a result, traditional homework has largely lost its previous value. Students can simply photograph a problem, receive a perfectly written solution within seconds, copy it into their notebooks, and submit it. In other words, the usual approach to homework no longer works as it once did. Yet AI's impact on education is not purely negative. On the contrary, it opens vast opportunities to design personalized learning paths, understand each child's unique strengths, and creates step-by-step plans for realizing their potential. When properly applied, AI can become a powerful tool supporting teachers. Of course, its widespread introduction will bring challenges, but it also marks a fundamental shift that will reshape general education systems worldwide in the coming years. The countries that succeed in creating the right technological platforms, those that integrate AI to assist, not replace teachers and do empower rather than hinder students, will gain a decisive advantage. By reforming their educational processes so that meaningful learning cannot be bypassed by automation, such countries will significantly enhance the quality of education and achieve a major leap forward. Let's move on. The changing structure of the labor market that I've mentioned, the gradual replacement of entry-level positions, is precisely what we'll explore further today. My colleagues will present on this topic, showing in detail how the traditional professional pyramid is being reshaped within individual occupations. To be honest, even while preparing this very presentation, we fully relied on artificial intelligence. From data visualization to tasks that would once have required a team of junior analysts. This allowed us to process and consolidate a tremendous amount of information. Such transformations within professions will inevitably demand a new approach to education. In the past, a typical career path began with graduation from university, followed by an initial job, where one gained experience and gradually advanced. Yet it is precisely these early career stages, the abundance of junior positions providing first-hand experience, that will increasingly disappear from the labor market. Therefore, education system will need to shift focus. Instead of training graduates for entry-level roles, they must prepare them to operate at the mid-level of professional competence from the start. This represents a profound challenge and major systemic shift. The third point concerns the fact that given the rapid technological changes we're witnessing, professions themselves and the roles people play within them will continue to evolve throughout life. Therefore, the key qualities required to build a successful career in this new world are adaptability and the capacity to adjust quickly as every profession undergoes transformation. It is no longer sufficient to complete a university education and rely on that knowledge for an entire lifetime. That model no longer works. Instead, continuous learning, flexibility, and the ability to master new tools and technologies will become essential lifelong skills. In short, both education and labor market, as I've emphasized several times today, will face profound change across the entire social sphere. Healthcare will also transform through digital platformization and the integration of artificial intelligence, which will be critical for boosting healthcare system efficiency and ensuring active longevity in this new demographic era. Speaking of our characters and the impact of social transformation, let's start with Africa. The introduction of new AI-based platform solutions will enhance both education and healthcare systems across the continent, enabling Africa to take on a leading role in the emerging global landscape. Demographically, the region's population structure will be a decisive factor. The world of the future will not only face a high demographic burden, but also a fundamental shift in balance. The majority of the global working age and young population will live in Africa. The future of humanity, to a great extent, depends on how successfully the African continent realizes its immense potential. Turning to our second character, a woman from Eastern Europe. the story is different but equally promising. The introduction of digital platforms in social sphere, education and healthcare, many of which are already being implemented today, will significantly improve her quality of life, enhance her children's educational opportunities, and make healthcare more effective and accessible. In short, her everyday life will markedly improve. As for our third character, a manager from Asia, his professional landscape will change dramatically. The emergence of logistics platform will transform demand for specialists in his field, requiring him to retrain, adopt new technological tools, and acquire fresh skills. He will need to adapt to a rapidly changing environment shaped by deep demographic shifts. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and for sharing this hour with us as we discuss these ideas and reflections. To conclude, let me leave you with one key thought. The world has entered a period of profound and far-reaching transformation, driven by advances in technology, shifts in global finance, demographic change, and many other forces. It is therefore crucial that governments, businesses, and individuals alike prepare for what lies ahead. If we understand these changes, embrace them, and adapt ourselves to the new reality, the future will belong to us, rather than us belonging to the future. Thank you all once again for your attention. As I mentioned, we have several fascinating presentations coming up next. I was just about to invite our next speaker. I believe we'll not have a brief announcement before we continue.